Hey, what's up there, YouTubers? It's me again, Brian, aka Gamer55551, and I am back with a video review. And for this review, we're going to be taking a look at Immortals Fenyx Rising for the Nintendo Switch. Watch out, this is the Gold Edition. The game's also available on the PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series S and X, PC/Steam, and of course Google Stadia, but we'll be focusing on the Switch version. And if you're interested in any gameplay footage, I'll have a link down in the description down below, or you could click on the card that will appear up on this video. In 2019, during E3, though, Ubisoft showed off a teaser for one of their games coming out. Basically, the game was originally entitled Gods and Monsters. It was a new game developed by the same folks who worked on Assassin's Creed Odyssey, though, and from what the details that have come out at the time, though, supposedly it would take a page somewhat from The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which to me isn't necessarily a bad thing. I consider Breath of the Wild my second favorite Zelda game, Majora's Mask being my personal favorite of all time, though. And they had a release date for basically February 2020, though. But as we got closer to February 2020 and all, questions started to emerge of what the game was actually looking like and all. That Ubisoft really didn't show a whole lot of, really didn't show barely anything at all, other than the teaser trailer, as that was the only thing we had working with us and all that stuff. So there was some concerns about whether or not this game was going to be good, or whether or not it's just maybe like overhyped or anything like that. And then, of course, came the situation with Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Breakpoint, a game that Ubisoft released with ranging from the whole issue with the microtransaction to the always online live services and all. And that game, unfortunately, became a commercial failure, and a very big disappointment, though, which later prompted Ubisoft to really reevaluate and re-examine a lot of their games. This led to basically the delay of two of their titles that was originally supposed to come out in February. That one would be Watch Dogs Legion, the other one would be basically Gods and Monsters. And for the most part, we didn't really see a whole lot of information other than a leak prototype that Stadia accidentally put out, to the fact that Gods and Monsters were being dropped to basically the name Immortals Fenyx Rising. So when they finally showed it off, it looked kind of interesting in a way, though. I was still iffy about it, but that was until a demo was dropped on Google Stadia, and I tried the demo out for a bit, though, and I thought, you know what, this wasn't so bad as I thought it would be. It could be better than I thought. So now that the game officially came out back in December, I finally got a chance to play the game on the Nintendo Switch. And I will say that while it's not 100% perfect, I am willing to go as far as saying that this is definitely one of Ubisoft's better games that they have put out over the years. So why don't we get started with the pros and cons, and we'll start off first with the pros. And the first one I do want to talk about is the story, which I will say is both interesting but also bizarre at the same time. Seeing the two gods, Zeus and shoot, I forgot what the other one is, but Zeus and the others tell the story about Phoenix and all, which you could play as, which Phoenix could be a man or a woman. You could choose how you want your character to look like and all that stuff. It's kind of interesting, especially some of the humor that the two gods basically argue and all that stuff, and the whole Greek mythology and all. So it's bizarre, but also interesting at the same time. The story didn't really blow me out of the water or anything like that, but I still think it was enjoyable, nevertheless. The next thing I do want to talk about is the visuals, though. Now, obviously, looking at it while the visuals may not blow me away, or again, this being on the Nintendo Switch, it's probably not going to look as good as what PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series S, or even PC or Stadia looks like. But the game still looks all right on the Nintendo Switch, and the art style doesn't look that bad or anything like that. So visually speaking, it's not a bad looking game. It's not going to look as good as the other versions, but the art style, I think, kind of in a way makes up for it, though. And last but not least, I do want to talk about is the gameplay. And for me, the gameplay is kind of like a mixture between the Assassin's Creed game in a way and sort of Breath of the Wild in a sense, though. You sort of get a little bit of a mixture of both. While I won't go as far as saying you're going to be able to, there's not a whole lot of stealth, at least based on my time with the game. You can do sneak attack and all, but most of it is the combat is very similar to what Odyssey's combat was, with some elements of Breath of the Wild, such as, exploring the open world like you did, and also having the stamina meter, and solving certainly some of the puzzles. And I will say some of the enemies in the game, to some extent, are kind of look like a kind of like something you would see in maybe in like the old God of War games and all that stuff. And I just definitely get not only the Assassin's Creed and Breath of the Wild vibe, but a little bit of a God of War and somewhat of a Kid Icarus vibe to the game, a little bit though. But either way, gameplay is a mixture of the Assassin's Creed and Breath of the Wild though, and in a way that can actually be a good thing though. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we'll get to part 2, which are the cons. So we'll take a little break, and we will be right back. Okay, and we are back with part 2 of our video review of Immortals Fenyx Rising for the Nintendo Switch, though. So now that I gave you the pros, why don't we get started with the cons? And like the pros, though, I have 3 cons to begin with. And we'll start with the first one. Now, I talked about the gameplay that has a mixture of Assassin's Creed and Breath of the Wild, which I view as a good thing. And it is, though. It's still a good thing. But at the same time, the other side of the coin is that it can also be a bad thing as well. Particularly for those who may not have liked the approach the Nintendo did with Breath of the Wild, especially with the whole stamina meter, which while you technically can go anywhere you want to, you also have to watch your stamina meter, and not everyone was a fan of that. 2, Ubisoft being sort of criticized of how they take their open world approach, like climb the tallest building or get to a certain point to unlock, the area of everything though. Although that has kind of changed over the years, especially with games like Assassin's Creed Origin and Odyssey, where they've really sort of changed that a little bit. So some of the approach to Assassin's Creed and Breath of the Wild in terms of its gameplay can be a good thing, but it can be a bad thing, especially for those who may not be a fan of Ubisoft's approach to open world or what Nintendo did with Breath of the Wild, particularly with the stamina meter though. The next thing I do want to talk about is the visuals, and while I don't think the visuals are as bad as a lot of people would make it sound like on the Nintendo Switch though, and the art style definitely isn't bad either though, it's pretty clear no matter how you look at it though, the Switch version is going to be the worst looking version compared to what the PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series S and X, PC, or Google Stadia version is. Is it bad? Not really. I mean, it still holds up very well. I mean, and this really isn't really a graphically demanding game. This isn't like what Doom or Doom Eternal or Wolfenstein 2, the New Colossus were, where those were graphically demanding games. And you could obviously see what compromises were made to make those games run on the Nintendo Switch and all that stuff. So I wouldn't go as far as calling this game a graphically demanding game in any way, but you can obviously point out what the areas where the game, where obviously it's where you can see where compared to what the other versions are, you can see how this one won't look as good as, say, the other versions are. I'm not saying the Switch version is bad or anything. It isn't though, but don't expect it to look good as the other versions though. And last but not least, I do want to talk about is the frame rate. Now, the Switch version, I do want to point out, does run at 30 frames per second though, and there's as far as I'm aware of, there's no like graphical option. You can't play this game either in. There's no like high frame rate or high resolution or anything like that. It stays at 30 frames per second, which technically isn't bad. I mean, 30 frames, yes, I will admit 60 frames per second is better, but 30 frames per second isn't necessarily bad if it's stable and all that stuff. And for the majority of time, based on my time with the game so far, it has been stable. It hasn't made the game unplayable or anything like that. But there are times when, it's possible depending on how much is going on the screen, there are times when the frame rate can dip a little bit. Like I said, I didn't find anything that made the game unplayable or anything like that though, but it is somewhat noticeable, especially for this game. So yes, it runs at 30 frames per second. It is mostly stable at 30 frames per second though, but there are times when the game frame rate does dip, but like I said, nothing that I saw made the game unplayable at all. Overall, I would say Immortals Fenyx Rising, in my view, is probably one of Ubisoft's better games that they put out, though. The story, though bizarre, it still is interesting nevertheless. Visually, the game looks nice, though, even though the Switch version is not going to look as good as the other versions that I pointed out, though. And the gameplay is a mixture. Gameplay, as I mentioned, is a mixture of the Assassin's Creed and Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which to me isn't necessarily a bad thing, but at the same time, I could see why some people may not like that, especially if you weren't a fan of Breath of the Wild or Assassin's Creed in general, or Ubisoft's approach to open worlds and all that stuff. And I will say, the game, like I said, it runs at 30 frames per second. Majority of the time I played it, the frame rate has been stable, but there are occasions when the frame rate does dip a little bit though. But I will say, as far as the Nintendo Switch versions go, Immortals Fenyx Rising holds up very well. If you're okay with the fact that it's not going to look good as the PS4, the PS5, or Xbox One or Xbox Series S and X, or possibly the Stadia or the PC version though, and you like the idea of bringing it on the go, then consider picking up the Nintendo Switch version of Immortals Fenyx Rising. If you're looking for the best looking version, obviously the other systems I pointed out, especially the PC version, are probably going to be the better looking version though. And like I said, I think this is one of Ubisoft's better games that they have put out, which certainly is not necessarily a bad thing. Ubisoft can make good games, but sometimes for every good game they've put out pretty much a lot of bad games and all. Here's to hoping that Immortals Fenyx Rising, though, sells well enough that maybe we'll get a sequel. I would be open to that. I hope the game fares better than what Starling Battle for Atlas had. How that just, the way that game fell apart, unfortunately, it's really sad and all that stuff. And playing Immortals Fenyx Rising, in my view, kind of does give you the idea that, if done right, I mean, it does give you an idea how a Kid Icarus game could technically work, much like how Starlink shows that it is possible how a Star Fox game could technically work if it is done right. And I wouldn't mind Nintendo taking an approach of doing a Kid Icarus game similar to Immortals Fenyx Rising though, but maybe with their own take on it and all that stuff. But we'll see if that ever happens. But overall, Immortals Fenyx Rising, I think it's a good game. I don't think it will overtake Zelda. I don't think it will overtake Breath of the Wild, but I would consider it one of Ubisoft's better games that they have put out. Okay, this concludes this video review of Immortals Fenyx Rising for the Nintendo Switch. And again, these are my opinion. What are yours? What are your thoughts about Immortals Fenyx Rising? Did you pick up the game in any way? Do you think it's one of Ubisoft's better games, or not really that good at all? Did you pick up the Nintendo Switch version? Do you think the Switch version looks fine, or did you prefer to get the other versions, whether it's the PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X and S, PC, or Google Stadia for that matter? Do you agree with what I said in this video? Do you disagree? Do you have a difference of opinion? As always, sound off on the comment section below. Let me know what you think. And if you like this video, I hope you hit the like button. I would appreciate it. And I hope you do subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you do, make sure you hit the bell icon for notifications of any new videos I put up. Also, feel free to share this video if you want to, and Feel free to donate to my channel if you like. You could do it through PayPal me or Patreon. Links will be in the description of this video. And I will see you again next time when I do another video. Hopefully that'll be soon. Until then, from Southern California, I wish you all a good day then. Bye!